In the depths of Hive Primus, the massive hive city of Necromunda, the great sump seas attract all types of hive dwellers. Possibly the most common types are the sump pirates, who make a living plundering others on the sump seas. An Ogryn captain named Bullflay has become particularly infamous. In this video, I paint up Bullflay and his pirates, and I talk about his backstory and the gang's rules as an outcast gang. This time on JD in the Sump Sea. Welcome back to JD in the Sump Sea. I'm Jay, and today I can't wait to talk about my newest gang for Necromunda, my Sump Pirates led by my Ogryn Bullflay. If you like Necromunda gang building, the lore, painting miniatures, and Sump Pirates, then perhaps you should bust out that Warhammer and smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that bell icon so you don't miss any of our videos. Dale and I will be at Adepticon this year, and we've got some big plans involving the Sump Wall. If you missed the Sump Wall last year, don't worry, you'll definitely be able to see it this year. We'll be in the room with all the other Necromunda stuff. There'll be more info on exactly what we're doing and where we'll be very soon. Just stay tuned to the channel for more information. Munda Stories on Instagram has just announced a brand new Necromunda terrain building competition, and we are two of the judges for it. I recommend you check out Munda Stories on Instagram for more information about it right now, and also stay tuned to the channel because we'll be talking more about it in the future as well. So to paint up Bullflay's Corsairs, I decided to use just the John Blanche Paint Sets 1 and 2. I wanted to challenge myself to a limited collection of colors to see if I could actually paint up this gang with only 20 colors. But anyways, let's get started. I already sprayed them with a black primer and then a white primer over that. I felt it didn't quite look right, so I took the ivory white from the John Blanche set and dry brushed over all of the gangers, and that seemed to get the details to pop better. I don't use a lot of contrast paints or speed paints, so I don't really do the zenithal highlight for that purpose, although it does help me in some spots, as you'll see, but I do it mainly to help me see the details of the minis better as I paint them. The first two John Blanche sets come with two really dark, almost black colors, Ironclad Gray, which is a very dark gray, and the Darkness, which is a very dark blue. I needed to choose one to be used on this gang as a black substitute, which I could paint over with a metallic paint. I ended up choosing Ironclad Gray. This would be my quote-unquote black color for this gang. I began painting the metal bits of this ganger with Ironclad Gray to later be painted over with a metallic silver color. I then chose Banshee Brown to use as a darker brown color for wood and leather items on the miniature. I used it here on the flail's handle. Tainted Garden is a green that reminds me of the color of green olives. This would be my choice for the color of his clothes. I then picked out Ruddy Terra, a kind of brown/orangey peachy color. This I would use for his long underwear, which was sticking out past his large overcoat on his arms and legs. I then wanted a lighter gray, so I took Ironclad Gray and mixed it with Ivory White. This new gray color was perfect for his boots. I would do a lot of color mixing when painting up these pirates for a couple of reasons. Number one, with such a limited palette I would need more colors, and number two, I hate doing things exactly as they are prescribed. I need to do my own thing, even if that means just mixing different colors of paint together to make something new. I then picked Sunburst Ochre and mixed it with Ivory White and Moonbeam Yellow. This was my first attempt at creating a skin color, since these paint sets don't have a skin color labeled paint. I thought this first mix looked a bit too yellow, so I added more Ivory White, and this time I think I got it right. I then painted his face with this new color that I made. I went back to Sunburst Ochre and painted his pouches on his back and the straps on his head. I went to Moonbeam Yellow, but this time I didn't mix it with anything. I always like to paint at least one model in each gang with blonde hair, so this guy would be this gang's Blondie. It was finally time to test my first metallic paint from this set, Heavy Metal. I was hoping this would make a good replacement for Lead Belcher by Games Workshop. Turns out this is even darker than Lead Belcher, which I'm not sure if I like or not. Only one effects paint is included in these sets, and it's Grim Rust. I had already bought 2 other rust effect paints from Army Painter, so I was curious to see how this one differed from those. This one is a little odd, not quite what I was expecting. It has, I think, a greenish tint to it, which I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest. Here's another paint I was hoping could replace a Games Workshop one. Voodoo Shade is a wash that I'm going to paint over the whole of this model to make it look grim and dirty. I applied it liberally to this ganger, just like I would an Agrax Earthshade, because I'm desperately searching for a replacement since Games Workshop has changed the formula, and the new Agrax just can't hold a candle to the old Agrax. I then used another wash that these sets came with, the Warm Skin Shade. I applied this over his entire head, hair and all. I was hoping to find another good GW alternative. Painting the rest of my gangers followed a similar structure. I would mix up some paints to form new colors, and some I would use stock out of the bottle. I'll be talking about my overall thoughts at the end, but for now, let's move on to my Ogryn leader. So Bullflay, my leader, was a bit more complex than the others, and I tried painting his coat brown, but quickly changed my mind to green instead. This was a mix of ivory white and tainted garden, making a lighter green color. This would be painted on only the outside of his coat. I then painted his boots a light brown, which was a mix of sunburst ochre and ivory white. I also used this light brown color for his shoulder bag and the straps on it. I then used fiery vermilion for the inside of his coat and the cuffs of his coat. I then added ironclad gray to the brown and made a darker brown that I would use on his pants. Using just straight ironclad gray, I then painted up everything that was metal. His gun, the metal on his boots, the big chunk of metal he was standing on, the shoulder and belly armor, and the shock stave. I then mixed fiery vermilion with a moonbeam yellow to make an orange, which is a color this set doesn't actually have. I used this orange for the boot cuffs and the shock stave handle, and the little tube coming off the handle of his gun. I realized that I hadn't yet painted his leathery tabard strips, so I used a stock Banshee brown from the set for them. I used moonbeam yellow for a little pouch on his belt. I then added more fiery vermilion to the orange I had already mixed up. I would use this darker orange as the first layer of color on his beard. I've always gravitated towards orange beards on minis, probably because of my history with Fantasy Battle Dwarf Slayers. I then mixed Sunburst Ochre and Moonbeam Yellow to make a skin color for this guy. I really like the uniqueness of this color, at least compared to most other minis I've painted in the past. I just think it looks great. I then used a heavy dry brush of heavy metal on all of his metallic bits, shoulder pauldron, belly armor, shock stave, gun, etc. He was really coming together, but it was at this point when I thought he looked too Christmassy. His green and red coat was just too festive. I needed to change the coat color somehow. I thought maybe painting the Turnbull turquoise speed paint over the green would change it enough to not evoke Christmas anymore. As I was painting it on, I felt pretty good about it, and the final result was definitely not Christmas. I then used the Final Wash Grimdark Shadow on his shockstave, his chainmail hanging from his left pauldron, and the metal trim on his boots. I was hoping this could be a replacement for Games Workshop's Nuln Oil, since that's yet another paint that they changed the mixture and formulation of. I wanted to add gold to his armor, so I used the second metallic paint the set comes with, that being Emperor Gold. This gold seemed to me to be much brighter than the heavy metal metallic paint I had used on him previously. I then used the warm skin shade wash on his head and hands like I did with the rest of the gang. Using Voodoo Shade, I then coated everything else that I hadn't used a wash on yet. Then to finish his metal armor of his shoulder and belly and his gun and metal rimming of his boots, I went back to the Grimdark Shadow and coated those areas with it. I mixed up Fiery Vermilion and Moonbeam Yellow, made a lighter orange, and dry brushed his beard. I then mixed the Ivory White and Turnbull Turquoise to dry brush his coat and to try and pick out the stitching details. I needed to add more detail to Bullflay, my Ogryn leader, because he just didn't look done yet. I used Voodoo Shade to go over his side satchel and shoulder strap, and I also used it on his beard. I did several more layers of progressively lighter dry brushing of orange on his beard, and then finally my partner suggested using the AK paint pens to get the little pieces of jewelry scattered throughout his beard. He was now almost done, but there was one more step to do. I'd wait until I painted all of their bases to do that. After using most of the paints from the Blanche Paint Sets 1 and 2, I decided I needed to use some other paints to do the bases the way that I wanted to. I busted out my old bottle of Stirland Mud from Games Workshop. It is a technical paint, meaning it's not a regular acrylic or wash or contrast, it has another element to it. The additional element in Stirland Mud is a fine sand. This technical paint is very thick, so you have to use the paintbrush as kind of a scoop and just slop it on. Then at last year's Adepticon, I purchased some Lethal Shadows paint, and this primer black I've found to be particularly good at base coating. I'd paint all the bases with this primer black, including painting over the Stirland Mud paint that I had just applied. I then wanted to start playing up the rustiness of the bases. I pulled out Dark Rust, an effect paint from Army Painter to paint over certain areas of each base. The Army Painter effect paints are like the technical paints of Games Workshop. These rust paints Army Painter makes have a very fine grit to them, which adds to the rust effect nicely. I then used Grim Rust from the Blanche Paint set and did a similar application to the bases in slightly different spots. Now it was time for the color that would cover the majority of the base, heavy metal. I did a heavy dry brush over the entirety of each base. I wanted the sides of the bases to have a greenish tint, so I went to Blighted Green and mixed with Ruddy Terra, again both from the John Blanche sets, and I mixed them together. I then painted the rims of each base all the way around. I needed to dirty up the bases again, so I went back to Voodoo Shade and covered the entire tops of each base with the Voodoo Shade. It was at this point that I decided to finish Bullflay's Shock Stave. I really wanted it to glow blue, but the John Blanche sets 1 and 2 just don't have any bright blues. I even tried mixing the turquoise wash with an ivory white, and it just didn't work. I turned to an old standby, Huge Miniatures Paints, and the color I used was Blaster Blue, a fluorescent of theirs. You can get Huge Miniature Paints from the Badger Games website at badgergames.com. They have a huge selection of miniatures, game rules, hobby supplies, and paints. And if you use our code JD2026 when you check out, you'll really help out the channel. At this point, I was nearly done. I just wanted to put some ooze, or goo, as I paint small things might say, onto my bases. I went back to Lethal Shadows paints and used fluorescent green and painted it on some of the recesses of the bases and made it look like it was flowing from one area to a base to another area of the base, where I wanted to make it look like it was flowing from an interior area of the base to the rim of the base. Once I had done that, I needed to make it look a bit more gooey, so I used Games Workshop's technical paint, Tesseract Glow, and I covered the fluorescent green and slightly all around it on each base to make it look gooier. And with that, I was done. When I built this gang in Munda Manager, I decided on an Outcast gang because it allows the most flexibility in design outside of a Venator gang. And I'm going to go through the models in the gang now and the rules and what weapons I gave them. And I think hopefully you'll see by the end why I chose an Outcast gang. So we'll start with these two gangers. They're Flink and Gornat. They are your basic hive scum. Flink has a shotgun and Gornat has a grab hook. A grab hook is a custom weapon that Benjamin, aka Perp Miniatures, made for our current Perpetual Sump Seas campaign. The idea behind the grab hook is that the grab hook is a weapon that could be used to grab things out of the sump or to grab onto a dock to help with mooring a boat. Drangle has a grab hook and a reclaimed auto pistol. Gruzzle has a shotgun and the massive claws mutation. Another thing Benjamin did was allow every gang to have mutations from the mutation table without needing to be an outcast gang with a leader with the mutant archetype. I thought a massive claw would be thematic, really just mutations in general would be thematic for a group of hive scum that hang out around the Sump Sea all day, every day. I do have some weapon duplication amongst my gang, but when I do, I add other things like massive claws or the reclaimed auto pistol for variety, and ease of recognition when just looking down at the battlefield. And then we have Drobna, who has a lasgun, and Saltra with a flail. I like lasguns a lot because if the target is in short range, which for a lasgun is 18 inches, and the hive scum aims, then they hit on a 2+. Lasguns are basically a pinning machine. Whether they do any damage is another thing. Flails may be one of the better, cheaper close combat weapons because of the +1 strength and the entangle. Slip is the last ganger in my Outcast gang, bringing the total to 7. One of the strengths of the Outcast gang is just how many fighters you can bring to a battle. The hive scum are cheap, and so you can get lots of fighters, and I do recommend thinking of that when building an Outcast gang. Reynard is my first champion here that I'm showing you, and I gave him furnace plates, a heavy stubber, and precision shot. The Outcast Champion's stat line leaves something to be desired, but by giving him Precision Shot, which means if he rolls a 6 to hit, no armor saves may be taken, then the 4+ Ballistic skill can be somewhat excused because while he won't always hit, when he does hit, it will hurt. Also, upgrading Ballistic skill during a campaign isn't the toughest thing to do, and is something to look at if you build an Outcast gang with champions who have good guns. Grig is a Dome Runner hanger-on. This model's from the new Hangers-On box set, and I really like it. I like that they've given Dome Runners the option to have a long las. I feel like it makes them more worth fielding in a battle than they used to be, and for only 20 credits, why the heck not? My second champion is Bootbrain. He has the mutation Vast Bulk, giving him 3 wounds to start with. He also has a Bolter and Furnace Plates, and he has a Divination Psyker with the Foreboding Psychic Power. He has a pet Necromundan giant rat named Ripjaw. His spear is a weapon I hadn't bought for him at gang creation since I couldn't find the points, but after my first game in the campaign we're currently playing him in, I was able to buy him a grab hook. Being a Diviner Psyker means he can reroll 1 die roll per game, and it can be literally anything, which makes his Bolter all the more useful. If he misses when he shoots, I can reroll it, which in many cases can change a game dramatically because of how good Bolters are in Necromunda. His Foreboding power can be used to give another ganger Overwatch, which can be particularly useful for Reynard's Heavy Stubber or for Grig's Long Las. His willpower of 8+ is terrible for casting psychic powers, and that's why I chose Divination, because of the built-in reroll. Willpower is also a stat that can be increased fairly easily during a campaign, so look to increase willpower of any champion psychers if you play Outcasts. And finally we have Bullflay, my Ogryn leader. His stat line is that of a Venator Ogryn leader, and his background is Goliath, so that would explain why the Furnace Plates are in the gang, and also he has a Stub Cannon, which is exclusively a Goliath weapon. I gave him Furnace Plates and an Armored Undersuit, so he starts with a 4+ armor save to the front and a 5+ around the sides and back. It's a good deal credit-wise, since Furnace Plates are only 5 credits. His Shock Stave is partially a weapon based on his backstory, and partially because it's a 2-inch versatile weapon. Since he was a slave Ogryn working for House Goliath and he broke free during a revolt, he stole his Overseer's Shock Stave and now uses it as a symbol of his freedom. I gave him Bull Charge, so he's a +1 strength on the charge and knockback. My thoughts with knockback were that he could charge in and knock someone off a boat or off a pier into the sump. His Stub Cannon also has knockback, so I was hoping that'd be another way to knock people into the sump. I could have given him better weapons and war gear, but 230 credits is a lot, and I feel like I equipped him fairly, and with enough tools that if used wisely, he should be effective. He's been okay so far in the campaign. In one game, I let a roaming hive scum charge him. He absorbed the attacks and killed not just 1 but 2 on the reaction attacks during the game, which earned him a lot of experience in that battle. I don't like building overpowered characters, but prefer ones that make sense story-wise, and I think he makes a lot of sense story-wise. Well, before I end the video, I just want to talk about my experience using the John Blanche paints. I think the colors are very evocative of, dare I say, the grim and the dark of 40k, and I think that they represent well the colors that he may use himself in the paintings that he paints and has painted over the years. The paintings that have informed the 40k universe. And soon, 2 new sets of John Blanche paints will be out, and I'll probably be acquiring them at Adepticon if they're there. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the first 2 sets that are available to purchase right now. I think the colors in those first 2 paint sets are very useful and are a good additional tool to someone who already has a good amount of paints at their disposal. I think in particular the Voodoo Shade, the Grimdark Shadow, and Heavy Metal. I think those in particular were my favorites. I think in Voodoo Shade I found a suitable replacement for Agrax's Shade, and I think in Grimdark Shadow I found a suitable replacement for Nuln Oil. And I think that the Heavy Metal colors is a suitable replacement for Leadbelcher, However, it is darker than Leadbelcher, and I do think that that's a negative. I like the lightness of Leadbelcher because you can then bring it down and darken it as much as you want. You can create heavy metal from Leadbelcher, and so I think that that's an advantage Leadbelcher has. But if you already want to start at that darker tone of silver, I think heavy metal is a very good paint for that. A few other paints I wanted to talk about were Warm Skin Shade, Emperor Gold, Turnbull Turquoise, and Grim Rust. Warm Skin Shade is a decent color, a bit darker than the Flesh Wash that Army Painter already has, but it's a really nice wash for skin of a lighter tone if you want to darken it up a little bit. I used it on Bullflay, my Ogryn leader in this gang. Emperor Gold is a pretty good gold color, pretty bright, decent gold color that I actually think I may prefer over Retributor Armor from the Games Workshop paint line. I may replace that with Emperor Gold. That's how much I liked Emperor Gold. Grim Rust is an effect paint that doesn't seem to have a good purpose in my mind. Maybe I'm simplistic, but I think the other two effect paints that I've used from Army Painter, Dark Rust and Fresh Rust, seem to be better to me. I prefer their colors. They're more orangey, and I think they work off each other better. I think Grim Rust has a strange greenish hue to it, I would say, and I don't know that I prefer how it looks compared to, say, Fresh Rust or Dark Rust. And lastly, I want to talk about Turnbull Turquoise. I thought that this would be a fantastic speed paint that I could use to color something really dark turquoise, with some color variations that speed paints are known to give. Well, I used it twice. Once on Bullflay's cloak, and the other time on Bootbrain's bolter. On his coat, I initially used a mix of ivory white and tainted garden to give kind of a lighter green. As I was painting him, I realized once I painted the red on the cuffs that it looked a little bit too Christmassy. So I needed to change that green color, and I thought the Turnbull Turquoise would be a good kind of a wash over that green to make it a little bit more turquoisey and not quite as Christmassy. And I do think it worked really well. It was darker than I thought it would be, but it also did have a kind of a turquoisey blue-green color to it that added something to that green. Now, looking at Bootbrain's bolter, I dry brushed it ivory after doing a Zenithal base coat of black with a white dry brush. I then just put Turnbull Turquoise directly on top of that, and this is the result. It looks virtually black to me. There's almost no turquoise in this color. So I feel like this turquoise is not quite the turquoise I thought I was getting. And sometimes I think the colors in these sets are a little bit too dark for their own good. I think that just having a darker version of another paint is not justification enough to make that color paint. Another thing that I noticed was mixing these colors together. Well, if you look back at the video, I had shown mixing the colors, and I had recorded them and I sped them up. And as I'm mixing them, it takes quite a while to mix some of these colors together. I think that that's also possibly a negative, is that it takes too long to mix the colors. I like, in particular, the Nostalgia 94 line from Warcolor. Those colors mix together really nicely, as do I feel like most Games Workshop colors do. These Army Painter John Blanche colors don't mix together as quickly as I'd like, and I'm not sure why that is. I don't have enough regular acrylic Army Painter paints to compare to these John Blanche ones, but if they're all like this, I'm not sure that I see the value in that. So what does this all mean? Well, I think I found some good replacements for a couple of Games Workshop paints. I found some paints that seem to not really have a place in my paint collection, and I found that the remainder of the paints, while nice colors, could also be made from paints that I already own of different manufacturers. I also noticed that a number of colors were missing from this set, and that I couldn't actually paint these miniatures exactly how I wanted to, because I didn't have a bright blue or a bright green. Overall, what do I think of these paints? Well, it's a mixed bag. They're fun, but limited. I'm thinking the two new sets that are coming out, sets 3 and 4, actually address this issue where they add in additional colors, brighter colors, blues, greens, blues and greens that are brighter that will allow you to have more options when painting. I feel like maybe the first 4 John Blanche paint sets, I don't know if there'll be more than 4, but if you have all 4 together, that could be a really nice paint set. You may not need additional paints outside of those. Although probably a good white and a good black is, you'd want that. But these are just my thoughts on the John Blanche paint sets. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Have you used them? Do I have some criticisms that aren't warranted? I do want to know what you think, especially if you've used the paints yourself. I do want to know what you think about how these paints work. Also, what do you think of Bullflay, my new pirate gang? Do you think they're interesting enough? I'm pretty happy with them, but I want to know what you think about them as well. So please, in the comments below, let me know what you think of my new pirate gang. But that's all I've got for you this time, and as always, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.